Greetings, people. So today I actually have a couple of, I guess, confessions to make almost. I mean, they're sort of personal revelations to me, but I guess they qualify as confessions as well. The problem is that they have sent me down this massive rabbit hole on trying to figure out how to solve for both of these revelations, if that makes sense. And I'm surrounded by it, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But basically, the first confession is that after all this time, I miss my Bradshaw rig. But not for the reason you might think, not for the sounds. I mean, I have better amps now. I have all the Strymon effects I have sound better than the rack gear I had back then. And that rack was well loved by everybody I worked for. It's not that. It's that a rack is sort of like a playground. It's a laboratory. If you think about the way that you put together a rack system, you try to solve for every contingency, everything you need it to do, and then you set it up and you wire it, and then you tie it down so it can't be moved. But that means you've got series and parallel audio, mono and stereo effects. You've got MIDI clock running between everything. So you can just sort of go in and experiment with something. It's got MIDI clock running to it. It's got all sorts of crazy routing. And then you can go, oh, I'll save that, send a preset to it, and all of a sudden you have a new sound. It's a playground. And everything I've done since then is more purpose-built. I'll build a board for a gig, or for a session, or for a mini tour or something. And so you don't get this complete feeling of a laboratory or of a playground. You built this for this, and it doesn't do everything that you'd want to be able to experiment with. So trying to solve for that is one thing, but the problem is, revelation number 2 is that I have a massive fear of missing out. Man, I get FOMO bad. I hate the idea that I might miss out on something cool. So when you tie down that rack, if you want to change something, it's a nightmare. The rack is there and it's full. You want to add something, you need another rack, or you have to take something out and then unwire everything that it's doing and then put in something new. Like it's a complete nightmare. So how do you serve both masters? You want the playground laboratory, but you also want it to be super flexible and changeable if you ever want to do something different. Well, that means we're going to build the ultimate pedal board. I mean, the ultimate pedal board. And in so doing, we're going to learn everything you would need to know about how to put together this crazy thing. And understand, all of this will not apply to any other person but myself. It's impossible. It's unruly, expensive, kind of silly, not practical. But in the process of putting all this stuff together, we're going to learn every single thing that you would need to know. And it's possible that you'll find one or two little nuggets that you can use in your own rig, even if you're not going to do this crazy thing. So the ultimate pedal board we're putting together is in collaboration with the guys from PedalPad. So we collaborated on the design of this crazy board, and you can tell already that just from the jack sticking out the sides, it's going to be pretty nuts. So I mentioned the rabbit hole, and let's look at it. Yeah, so rabbit hole personified. So this is all the stuff I'm going to need to put together this ultimate pedalboard system. There's more stuff here that I'm really going to be able to use, so I'm going to have to make some decisions, but in general, I'm going to do my best to shoehorn the lion's share of this inside this enclosure. It is double-decker and the top flips up, so that was a big part of the actual design of it and the stuff that I talked to Phil a lot about. And I'll take you through the actual pedal board itself here in a bit, but for now, here's all the drive stuff I'd like to be able to include. Not sure if Compadre is going to fit yet. In my initial layouts, it wasn't there, but we'll see. I got all my wet stuff here. I've got the control and audio routing portion of stuff. I have two Morningstar ML10X audio routers. One will go in front of the preamp, one will go in the effects loop. I have a Morningstar MC6 Pro that's going to be the main MIDI controller, but there will be some times when I want to be able to use the Rocktron MIDI Mate at the same time. So woohoo, it's going to be fun. Pedalboard interface with 8-channel snake. I built a little box with 2 expression pedals that work this way. So for simple stuff like delay level and reverb level, it's easy to do with not much space. 3-foot switches. I've got a little baby Peterson Strobo Stomp tuner there. It's tiny. It's probably the only thing that'll fit. Strymon conduit MIDI interface. And then I've got to choose between the wah pedals, volume pedal. 2 expression pedals can hang off the right-hand side of the board when I need them. All of this stuff's going to require a bunch of power. So 2 Zumas and 2 Ojai R30s as the power supplies. And then all this stuff over here is all of the tools and the raw parts that I'm going to need to be able to get this stuff together. So soldering irons, desoldering irons, heat guns for the shrink wrap. You got multimeters, you got magnifying glasses and little tweezer things so hold things that I'm soldering so I can see it. You got drills, you got capacitors, resistors, switches, diodes. You got DC power cables, 5-pin MIDI, 7-pin MIDI, straight 1/4 inch, angled 1/4 inch, all sorts of crazy stuff. This is everything that I'm going to need to be able to build this nutso pedal board. So it'll be fun, and I can't wait to get my room back already. It'll be fun. It's going to take me a long time. Who knows what I'll look like when I'm done, but it'll be fun. There'll be multiple episodes. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff. I'll make sure to give you all the materials that we use. So circuits, schematics, wiring diagrams. I'll take photos of all the insides of all the stuff that I've made so you can replicate it for yourself. Some of these things I've never really seen available from other people. So there might be something that I've built for myself that you might really like. And you'll be able to recreate anything that I do here with all the materials that we have at the end. So in terms of the stuff that we're actually going to cover, so we're going to cover the pedal board itself, in terms of, the type of board. Do you need an off-the-shelf kind of thing like something from Pedal Train or Friedman, or do you need a more of a custom kind of thing like I've done here with Phil from PedalPad? There's Greg from Exact, Dave from LA Sound Design, Spencer from West Coast Pedalboard. These are all guys that do great jobs. So it depends on what you need and what you want, that kind of stuff. Figuring out the size is important. Figuring out the pedal layout is important. We're going to talk about what kind of pedals you should include. Should you aim for universality, or should you still put some of those really unique one-use only kind of pedals on there? We'll figure that out. Testing them out can be tricky, especially in a situation like this where I got the Morningstar controllers that have TRS outputs to use all 10 loops. It can be a little tricky if you don't have all the cables. So that's something to talk about. Basically, we're going to talk about cable management. What cables, should you buy them? Should you make them, both for audio and 9-volt for power? We're going to talk about attaching the pedals. So if you watch the other video, you know that I love dual lock. That's my normal way of doing it. However, the bottom of this board is carpeted. So that won't work. So I'm going to try the bike chain thing. Stick around for that. That'll be fun. I've already tried it. It works pretty well. Who knows? So we're going to talk about the equipment that we used to actually make the board. So all the stuff that I bought just for this project, the little magnifying glass thing and the heat gun and all that kind of stuff. I'll send you all the Amazon links for it so you can find everything that I've used if you want. We're going to talk about how to plan for the future and expandability. So, some strategies to think about in terms of, hey, how can I make sure that this is actually a long-term project and I'm not going to want to tear it apart next week. Switch wiring and things like that. Like, a lot of people don't really know how switches work, and sometimes it would be just nice if someone told you really quickly. So we'll do that. We're going to talk about MIDI controller and patch setup. Like once everything's together, how do you actually control it? We're going to talk about programming your Morningstar devices, that kind of stuff. They do a nice job with the software for that. Powering everything, including MIDI phantom power. We're going to talk about interface design and Snake. Obviously, I don't want to, once I've gone to all this trouble, I don't want to plug multiple cables in the side to get to the amp. I just want to plug in one thing. So I'm using Speak-On, which is 8 channels to and from the board and the amp, which is cool. So that's one cable for everything, including the effects loop and amp switching and all sorts of stuff. Creating tones in the scenario once everything's together. How do you build a patch? Like you got all these pedals. Like where do you start? End, middle, the unique pedal that you want to center the whole tone around. Like there's all sorts of ways to do it. We're going to talk about the conduit MIDI interface, how to set it up and how to use it. We're going to talk about with coming up with systems to help you remember things without having to look at your notes. So I'm a really big fan of creating mnemonics that work with the way your brain works. So I've soldered entire studios together, like the wiring harness for multiple rooms together. And at some point you have to have a mnemonic, a way to remember what the order of things is, or else you'll always be looking at your notes, which I never want to do. Power considerations, obviously we're going to need lots of it. And then finally, USB concerns. There's a lot of these devices that have USB on them. One of the things I don't want to do is tear the thing apart if I want to update firmware or upload something. So there's actually a USB hub that is built into the actual pedal and the pedal board, and you'll be able to just sort of jack in a USB cable right into the back of the pedal board and access any of the devices that have USB-C on them. So pretty cool. That's what we're going to cover. But now we should really talk about the pedal board itself. First thing to decide when you're thinking about a pedal board is what style you want. There's so many options on the market these days. You've got stuff off the shelf that are sort of like, ready to go kind of things, like Friedman, or this is the pedal train. This is the board I've been gigging with for a while. Obviously the drive stuff's on the floor now, but you stick the power supply up underneath it and drag a bunch of cables to it, and it's cool and it works really well. But what I wanted for this was something that's more like my rack. I wanted to be able to take the front off and the back off, plug in a couple things and go. I didn't want to have to take the top off, pull the pedal board out of the case, put it on the ground, and then plug it in. I just wanted to take the top off and get to work. And once I had that idea, I started going on the internet and finding different companies that made these things. And there are a couple different people that make pedal boards like this. But I found PedalPad and I called Phil. And we had a number of different phone conversations, a number of different email conversations about what I wanted and what he thought and what would help. The other thing that I wanted to make sure that I had was a bottom deck. So unlike this kind of thing where, all the pedals are on the top and then the other ones are just sort of stuck underneath, I wanted there to be two levels. So I could basically lift the first level up and look at the bottom level. So it was important that there was a wood box on the bottom of the pedal board that I could screw all the stuff into. So that's where the interfaces go, power supplies, drive pedals, all that stuff is going to be underneath the board. So I needed to know how much clearance I had for the knobs at the angle and all that kind of stuff. So he and I talked about which series of pedals would make the most sense, which series of pedal board rather would make the most sense. And when we decided that it needed to be the extra deep, extra tall lid, then it was a matter of seeing how wide it should be. And I thought 23 by 17 sounded like a good idea based upon just some rough figuring out. So I actually have this camera Pelican case, and it's almost exactly 17 by 23. So I just set it on the ground and started putting pedals on the top of it to arrange it, taking into account cable concerns and power supply concerns and things like that. And it's important that you do that because you will likely find that there are sometimes you're going to need right angle stuff that you didn't think you were going to need. So I actually bought a bunch of USB-C right angle adapters and things because I could tell that I was going to need to be able to have those cables go right down the back of the MC6 Pro and not be hanging out around. So it's important that all this stuff gets tied down really nice and tightly. So that's important. So I made Phil a bunch of sort of to scale drawings in Photoshop based upon those measurements. Here's a couple examples of those. So I just basically took a grid and just made sure that each grid was, each grid represented an inch. So 23 inches by 17 inches, with an elevation of whatever it was. So he could look and see exactly where I wanted those jacks placed. And it was pretty funny, actually. He insisted that I did not do the drilling myself. Because his name's on it and he wanted it to look nice. And obviously, if he does it, then he can drill the holes before he puts the Tolex on. Whereas if I would have drilled the holes after the Tolex was on, I would have completely carved up stuff. So there were a couple things like that I had to deal with. I can't drill my own holes, man. But it came out great. And then basically, then we just talked about what I wanted to have happen on the board as far as expandability goes. So what I wanted to have happen was I wanted the ability to add two large expression pedals to the right-hand side of the board if I needed them. Sometimes I can get away with just the little box that I made, but sometimes you want full expression pedal capability. I wanted the ability to add a drive pedal of some type to the preamp side of the amp circuit. So one ML10X is sitting on the preamp side, and there are 10 loops there. So I've got a couple loops that come out to the right-hand side of the board with power and TRS MIDI. So if it's a Compadre or a Riverside or a Sunset or something like that, I can actually have it be part of the MIDI scenario, which is amazing. And so basically that's the right-hand side of the board. On the left-hand side of the board, I wanted a couple things. I wanted a looper to be able to go off the left-hand side of the board. So I've got audio I/O and power for that. I wanted another auxiliary pedal or series of pedals to be able to be inserted into the effects loop part, the post effects. So there's an extra loop in the ML10X available for that, and that comes out the left-hand side. And then I also wanted to have a stereo out from a DI. So if I wanted to do wet, dry, wet, or just straight to the board sometimes with an Iridium or something, I can do that. And so all that stuff is there. And then last but not least, on the backhand panel, I wanted to have an 8-channel speak-on connection for the Snake, and also a USB-C panel jack, so that all of this stuff can remain plugged in and I don't have to unhook something when I want to do a firmware update or update presets or something. All I have to do is just plug in the USB-C and any device that's on that hub will show up, which is pretty rad. Hopefully, everything that we've covered so far has piqued your interest, and you're going to stick around to see how the end of the Ultimate Pedalboard Build video series comes out. I have so much soldering to do. Oh my God. Anyway, I will see you again in episode 2. See you soon. Bye.